The next on the program, I'm very honored to introduce the Chief Economist of the International Energy Agency, Mr. Laszlo Varro. And if you want to ask him questions, please use the chat. Please, Mr. Varro.
Yes, so thank you very much for the kind introduction and the invitation. I'm going to share with you the key insights of this year's World Energy Outlook, which is the flagship publication of the International Energy Agency. 2020 is not an average year. It is a year of the coronavirus crisis, which triggered an unprecedented decline in economic activity and also in energy use. Given that during the coronavirus crisis, governments intentionally constrain mobility, and of course, the energy needs of the mobility sector, transportation sector, are still predominantly covered by oil. Unsurprisingly, oil was the most heavily affected. Global oil demand declined by around 8%, and around 1/3 of the decline was the aviation sector alone, which was very badly affected. Coal and gas are primarily used in stationary energy sources, most importantly power generation. Electricity survived the crisis better than oil, but even in the case of electricity, we have observed a decline of electricity consumption, while renewable energy production remained robust. So gas and coal-fired power plants were competing in a shrinking market share. We needed much less conventional generation. And within that shrinking market share, gas managed to overcompete coal due to abundantly supplied global natural gas and LNG markets. So despite coal not being used in the transport sector, the decline of global coal demand is almost as harsh as the decline of global oil demand. Now, on a forward-looking basis, we think that under the policies currently implemented by governments, global oil demand will recover, but global coal demand has already peaked, whereas natural gas and renewables emerge as the two pillars of the future energy supply. Now, unfortunately, we also have to reflect on the possibility of the recovery being delayed, especially in Europe. A second wave epidemic is already happening, and there are serious concerns about the prospects of the economic recovery. With a delayed recovery, that would eliminate any recovery in global oil demand and push coal even further down. But very importantly, we think that even in the delayed recovery case, even in a rather negative macroeconomic environment, renewables are poised for a dynamic growth. Now, in the case of oil, before the epidemic, we projected a plateauing of global oil consumption. And we now see a gradual recovery as the world economy recovers. China, for example, is already increasing its oil consumption as its economy recovers from the coronavirus crisis. Now, the oil demand trajectory, which is consistent with the Paris Agreement, that's the IEA Sustainable Development Scenario, that would involve a very sharp early reduction of our global oil demand. By the 2030s, this would amount to almost 2 million barrels per day annual decline in global oil demand. That would be achieved by a combination of electric vehicles, efficiency, and modal shift in the transportation sector. Natural gas is relatively well positioned. We see improving energy efficiency, cutting natural gas demand. And also we see, especially in Europe and the United States, to switch from gas-fired power generation to renewables. But there is still a potential to replace coal with gas in the power generation sector, especially in the Asia Pacific. And there is a significant market growth for energy services, especially in industrial energy use. However, this is under the currently stated energy policy environment, stands for Stated Energy Policy Scenario. In a sustainable development trajectory consistent with the Paris Agreement, natural gas does not disappear, but we have much bigger efficiency improvements, a much larger shift from natural gas to renewables, a smaller potential for coal to gas switching, and very importantly, around half of the gas market growth would have to take place in facilities equipped with carbon capture and storage. Now, right now, there are very, very few countries in the world, I'm pleased to say that Norway is one of them, which takes carbon capture and storage seriously, and this technology will need to accelerate significantly. Now, in the electricity sector, so far, the 21st century was the century of coal. So we are now 20 years into the 21st century, and this century so far, coal was by far the biggest source of new power generation. But this is shifting. We think that coal-fired power generation globally is now peaked, and even under the current relatively weak climate policy environment, solar PV is emerging as the #1 driver of global power generation. And if you ask the question, whom we can put our hopes to stop climate change, so if we want to go all the way for a well below 2 degrees climate stabilization, the answer is that we have to bet very strongly our hopes on solar and wind. Solar will, of course, play a bigger role proportionally in countries like India. So wind and offshore wind will be very, very important in Europe. But globally, solar PV is definitely emerging as the #1 generation source. Now, that will require a different power system, because when we looked at what will be the role of solar PV in a sustainable development trajectory, just 20 years from now, what we saw that in all the major regions of the global economy, we will have solar capacity approaching, or in the case of China and India, even exceeding summertime peak demand quite significantly. So consequently, we will have to deal with the situation that there will be a massive concentration and massive potential excess production of solar in the middle of the day in the summer parts of the year. So power systems will need to encourage demand response. We need to shift demand to the sunny hours, need to develop smart charging of electric vehicles, and need to deploy stationary storage. So in practically every power system, the flexibility needs of the system will grow much more rapidly than electricity demand. Now, batteries will no doubt play an important role, but in every major region, the flexibility portfolio will be diversified. Both natural gas turbines and also hydropower will continue to play an important role in providing flexibility to power systems all around the world. Now, another thing we have to keep in mind about solar is that the tendency to talk about solar energy and distributed energy in the same sentence as if the two were the same is misleading. Around 80% of global solar deployment is large utility scale ground-based solar projects. Residential rooftop solar projects are actually secondary in the growth of solar energy. And it's not simply that utility scale solar projects produce more energy in terms of the new investment, but also the eye-catching very low numbers for solar costs are all large utility scale projects. Now, those large utility scale projects, from the point of view of the energy system, are power plants. They just run with a different technology, but they need a strong interconnected transmission grid to feed their electricity and deliver their electricity to the end users where the electricity is needed. Consequently, the energy transition, which will involve a rapid increase on the reliance on wind and solar power, is associated with a step change in the investment need in the electricity network. And that is a major concern, because this increasing investment need in the electricity network is coming after several years of consecutive decline in investments in electricity networks. Global investment in the electricity networks peaked in 2016, and it has already been declining before the coronavirus crisis. In my view, if you ask the question, what is the most dangerous risk to the energy transition, where things can go wrong, that most dangerous risk is a potential failure of timely investment in upgrading electricity networks. Now, when we looked at all the energy policies implemented all around the world, the conclusion that we came to is that under normal macroeconomic conditions, we have enough investment into low carbon energy and enough innovation and enough efficiency improvements to compensate for the growth of the global population and the growth of the global economy, keeping carbon dioxide emissions more or less constant. Now that's of course a major achievement compared to increasing carbon dioxide emissions, but not good enough. Stagnating carbon dioxide emissions will still bring the world into a disruptive 3 degrees climate change. Now, a well below 2 degrees stabilization, like our sustainable development scenario, which is a mathematical representation of the Paris Agreement, would involve global carbon dioxide emissions peaking and rapidly declining already this decade, and then converging towards zero emissions in the second half of the century. Several jurisdictions, including the European Union, implemented zero carbon pledges for mid-century. Unfortunately, the jurisdictions like the European Union, which made such pledges, already had a rapid decline of carbon dioxide emissions before that zero carbon pledge. So European emissions declining by 8% a year instead of declining only by 6% a year mathematically makes not much difference. So the impact of the net zero pledges is only a small proportion of the gap. This fall, President Xi Jinping made a very important announcement in the United Nations committing China to achieving a net zero emission society. Given the size and the carbon intensity of the Chinese energy system, President Xi's commitment, if successfully implemented, would actually be bigger than all the other net zero commitments combined. But we still have more than half of the gap to be filled. Of course, all the analysis and the modeling will be done before the American presidential elections. So now we are looking forward to hearing the energy policy concepts from the Biden administration. Now, once we want to go for net zero in 2050, and I'm not talking about net zero power generation in Norway, we are talking about a global net zero economy-wide. So that would be 7 factories in Pakistan without carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. That would have to involve carbon dioxide emissions declining at the same speed that they declined in 2050 with the coronavirus restrictions. But next time, we want to achieve that without shutting down the global economy, which will require innovation and will require clean energy investment. Now, in the case of Europe, Europe is actually the major region of the world economy where solar is not going to be the #1 energy source. The reason for this is that Europe has peak demand for electricity 7 o'clock in the evening in December, when Europe is pitch dark. So solar production in Europe is not well correlated with electricity demand patterns. Solar will play an important role in Europe, and there is no doubt that European solar production will also have to very significantly increase from the current level. But we think that in the European context, onshore wind and offshore wind will generate more energy in a low carbon system. But this is not only an electricity system transformation. The car fleet will have to be electrified. This is more or less on track. Now, what is not on track is energy efficiency in the building sector. The current European ambition to raise the emission reduction target to 55% from the original 40% is the equivalent of retrofitting a city of Berlin in every 3 months. It's a very radical ambition for transforming the European building stock, and that is unfortunately not on track with the current policies. And last but not least, we do think that not everything will be electrified, and low carbon gases, both biogas and hydrogen, will have to play a major role. Now, net zero emissions globally by 2050 is not impossible, but it's not impossible in a sense like in 1960 it was not impossible to go to the moon. It was done, but it required a combination of political commitment, innovation, and investment. And all stakeholders will have to play their part. Companies will have to take the energy transition very seriously, and they have to put it in the center of their corporate strategies. One good example for that is low carbon hydrogen production, which will be a corporate big business, would need to scale up by around a factor of 100. Consumers will have to change their behavior. We identified over 2 billion tons of potential carbon dioxide emissions from changing consumer habits. For example, in my childhood, every year we had a strawberry season when we ate strawberries from the garden of my grandmother. So maybe we are not going to have a technological solution to the problem of transporting strawberries from Peru to a European supermarket in the middle of January. So consumer behavior also plays a role. One very important thing that consumers do is that they buy cars. So changing consumer habits will have to play an important role in the transport sector. And last but not least, the finance sector will have to scale up. There is a lot of discussion about sustainable finance, green bonds, green investments, but overall clean electricity investment will have to scale up by a factor of 4 in just 1 decade. And of course, we need overarching strong government policies to achieve that. Now, for a 1.5 degree stabilization, we also need to reflect on the lock-in to the existing infrastructure. We have factories, we have power plants, we have aircraft, we have transport industrial systems and buildings, millions of them heated by natural gas. So all these facilities use fossil fuels and emit carbon dioxide. And if you use all these facilities with their optimal technical lifetime, so we use a car for 15, 20 years, we use a power plant for 30, 40 years, we use a building for a century or more, then the already existing infrastructure locks in a 1.65 degrees warming. So if from tomorrow morning, every new thing that we build or buy is purely 100% zero carbon, and I have to say we are very far from that, we already would have 1.65 degrees warming just from the already existing infrastructure. Consequently, we have to take out those locked emissions. And this is why the IEA has a very strong work program on carbon capture and storage, because some of those facilities will need to be retrofitted with carbon capture and storage. And also, there is a significant likelihood that carbon concentrations might overshoot, and we might have to remove carbon from the air with the proper application of carbon capture and storage technology. So to sum it up, the world is in a position where we have the ability to tackle climate change. We can do a zero carbon transition. Solar is one of our most promising tools. It is going to emerge as the #1 energy source. So after the century of coal and the century of oil, the 21st century can indeed become the century of solar, but there is a lot of hard work still ahead. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ms. Varro. And I have time for a couple of questions before you leave. Sure. Excellent. You mentioned in your presentation that we are now actually the investments within the electricity systems are declining, has been declining for some years now. Why do you think that we're investing so little in electricity systems? And that is what we need to bring the electricity out to people to increase their living standards.
So electricity networks are regulated assets in practically every country. So governments or government mandated regulators determine the investment activities of the electricity network. And in our view, there are two main reasons for the systematic underinvestment in the electricity networks. One is the financial regulation. There are many countries where the regulatory environment is not investor friendly enough, not transparent enough, not stable enough to attract investment. So there are many countries where the electricity networks don't earn attractive returns. And the other main reason is social acceptance. People don't like high voltage transmission lines, and very often it takes a lot of time to get building permits and construction permits.
But could I ask you as well, because we have heard earlier today that the cost of producing solar energy are now competitive with coal, it's competitive with wind power and also natural gas around the world. There are a lot of attention around investing in renewable energies. So we have a lot of capital there. We have sharp fall in costs, but still, the money is not finding the projects that is needed to increase the production of solar power fast enough. How should we link the capital and the projects at the place where we really need solar power? Sorry, could you please unmute your microphone?
So the overwhelming majority of solar investment, and this is true for wind investment as well, is based by government policies. The most popular is long-term capacity auctions, and that gives a very flexible tool for governments. So if the government of Mexico auctions 2 gigawatt solar capacity instead of 1 gigawatt solar capacity, then there will be 2 gigawatt of solar built in Mexico. So one thing that we have been encouraging governments is to use these auction schemes to increase the ambition. Now, also, governments have to make sure that land use is appropriately managed. A large solar farm requires several hectares of land, and in many countries, acquiring this land is problematic and slow. So I should, for example, highlight that in India, the Indian government did a very good job in addressing those land use issues, and that's one of the factors why solar is doing so well in India. And last but not least, the grid connections will need to be managed. And I should also highlight that we believe that without government action to address the land use, the grid connection issues, and also to have contracts providing investment security, technology alone will be insufficient. So the improvement of solar technology is an opportunity, but governments still have a job to do to take advantage of it.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree, because we need to work together, both of the industry, the financial sector, and the politicians, if we're going to make this to work within the very short timeline we have. I've got a question here from one of the listeners. The question is, does a combination of solar and other renewables be a good idea for taking steps towards net zero emission goals of Europe, such as solar, for example, together with hydro or green hydrogen?
Definitely. So the electricity systems which have a diversified portfolio of renewable production, like Spain, for example, or the state of Texas in the United States, are much easier to manage from a system operation point of view than power systems which only have one type of renewable energy. So it's a very good idea to have a diversified portfolio of wind and solar. Hydropower is an absolutely excellent complement to both solar and also wind, because both wind and solar has weather-dependent variability, and hydropower plants can flexibly adjust their production, and they can even store energy in the form of pumped storage hydro. For hydrogen production also, it's a good idea to have a diversified portfolio, because hydrogen production, the hydrogen electrolyzers, have high capital costs. So if you run an electrolyzer only at noon when the sun is shining very brightly, that hydrogen will be a very expensive hydrogen. Whereas if you have electrolyzers in regions like Australia, in northern Mexico or Morocco or some parts of the Middle East, which are windy and sunny, then you can have almost like a baseload renewable production, and hydrogen production can be extremely cost efficient.
When you're into talking about hydrogen, I must ask you at the very end here, because Norway has been focusing and want to look into the options of producing hydrogen, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and also carbon capture and storage. What role can a small country like Norway take in the energy transition?
So Norway is playing a very important, very proactive role. So Norway is of course already an almost completely decarbonized energy system, and also the Norwegian hydropower facilities play a very important role in the entire European scheme, providing flexibility. Norway actually has more flexibility in its hydropower plants than all the batteries combined in planet Earth. Another important factor is that Norway has been pioneering the applications of carbon capture and storage technology, which in our view is absolutely essential for the energy transition. We need carbon capture and storage to deal with the heavy industry. We need carbon capture and storage to deal with the logged-in emissions of the young power plant fleet in Asia. So Norway's pioneering role in this respect is important. And I would also say that at a more philosophical level, the fact that Norway, which is a major oil and gas producer, is playing a very positive, very proactive role in clean energy transitions has been extremely important in the political discussions with other major oil and gas producers. So I personally had an experience to rely on the example of Norway and the help of our Norwegian colleagues to convince policymakers and decision makers in other major oil producers that this is something that they can go ahead with it. So I'm very grateful for the proactive and positive role that Norway has been playing.
Thank you very much. And I'm very lost. It's actually totally dark here, and almost dark all day and all night long. Do you believe in solar power in Norway?
So in a northern climate, you are not going to have a purely solar-based economy. That's absolutely clear. And if you recall my slide on the relative role of solar in the different regions, we do think that in a clean energy system in India, solar will play a bigger role than in Europe. And it's unsurprising if anybody who has ever visited India is not going to surprise on it. Having said that, there are interesting potential, and also, Norway is a very long country with a very complex geography. So depending on the region, depending on the utilization, solar can be interesting in Norway as well. But again, realistically, the true mission of solar will be in India, Africa, and the Middle East.
Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time and with us here in Norway today. And it's great to have you here and listen to your predictions about the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Then we're starting to close in on at the very end here, and at the very end, I must take the opportunity just to talk a bit about the financial sector, because there are some points I want you to remember and think about. We're seeing a great interest in the green shift, or the shift from oil, gas, and not at least coal, to renewables such as the solar and wind power. Of course, you have a very good starting point producing solar energy. And that is important, of course, when you talk about the green shift and we talk about climate. But one thing I want you to remember and reflect a bit on is that if we are going to reach the sustainability goals, the energy production itself is not the only thing we have to think about. We also have to remember that it has to be for solar power or for wind power or renewables to win a big market share in the future. We also have to be sure that the full production process from you actually start producing the solar panels until the panels have ended its use and actually find a place where you can get rid of them afterwards, are in line with a circular economy or are in line with the sustainability goals. Why I'm mentioning this now? Well, a lot of the big companies such as Moody's, S&P, and not at least other companies rating different companies according to sustainability. They are putting highlighting how different companies are working with sustainability within the full cycle. So even though you are producing solar power, you need to be sure that the people who's actually producing, or the companies who's actually producing the solar panels, the people who are exporting the solar panels to where they're going to be placed, and how you get rid of the solar panels after they've been used is taken care of in a sustainable way. All this will count when you are looking for financing in the future, because now we are seeing that more and more investors, more and more financial institutions want to know how you work with sustainability. The rating companies are going into your webpage to look at or to trying to find information about how your company is putting sustainability on the agenda and how you work with it. It doesn't have to be perfect today, but you need to have a strategy of how you're going to work with this question in the future. So start at least to think about it. How do your company report on sustainability matters? Be very clear and make it easy to find information about sustainability, because it's already important for the financial industry, for investors, how we work with it. And remember also at the very end here, you are producing green energy. That is what we want. So please do it also sustainable, not only green. Thank you so much, and thank you for the attention. And I hope you had a brilliant day. I have, so at least.